Chapter 15, Conflict, War, and Terrorism. And I want to begin by saying that war is the most violent form of conflict. Wars have existed throughout history and continue in the contemporary world, and it certainly is one of the great paradoxes of human history. It creates and defends nations, but it also destroys them. I think, along with population and environmental problems, conflict, war, and terrorism are probably the most serious of all social problems in their threat to societies, the human race, and life on Earth. As far as the economics of military spending, the increasing sophistication of military technology has commanded a large share of resources, totaling worldwide $1.63 trillion in 2010. Global military spending has been increasing since 1998, with a dramatic increase between 2002 and 2008 as a consequence of United States-led operations after September 11th. And we all know that the material cost war does continue long after the combat ends. The Cold War was the state of military tension and military rivalry that existed between the United States and the former Soviet Union. It justified and provided justification for large military expenditures. The end of the Cold War, along with the rising national debt, resulted in cutbacks in the United States military budget. I do want to say that today military spending has again reached the Cold War levels. The United States military is the largest single, their spending is the largest single percentage of any nation. Under symbolic interaction, make sure you know that attitudes and behaviors that support war does develop during childhood. And I also want to say that most world governments preach peace through strength rather than strength through peace. Now, there are many causes of war. Certainly most wars involve more than one cause. The immediate cause may be a border dispute, such as conflict over land or other natural resources. We can have religious tensions that exist for decades that can certainly also contribute. As far as conflicts over values and ideologies, wars over differing religious beliefs have led to some of the worst episodes of bloodshed in history. And class, it's easy to see how conflicts over ideologies are not easily resolved. They certainly are less likely to end in compromise or negotiation because they are fueled by people's convictions. Religion or racial, ethnic, and religious hostilities are certainly another major cause of war. Conflicts between racial, ethnic, and religious groups often stem from conflicting values and ideologies. And then, of course, there is a characteristic security dilemma, a characteristic of the international state system that gives rise to unstable relations between the states. For example, as state A secures its borders and interests, its behavior may decrease the security of other states and cause them to engage in behavior that decrease A's security. Revolutions and civil wars involve citizens warring against their own government, which often results in significant political, economic, and social change. Revolutions and civil wars are more likely to occur when a government is weak or divided, when it's not responsive to the concerns and demands of its citizens, and when strong leaders are willing to mount opposition to the government. Some countries engage in war to maintain or restore their national pride. To give you an example, certainly Hitler's rise to power was laid by the treatment Germany received from the victors at the end of World War I. Terrorism is the meditated use or threatened use of violence by an individual group or an individual or a group to gain a political or social objective. There are two different types of terrorism. We have transnational terrorism, which occurs when a terrorist act in one country involves victims and targets institutions, governments, or citizens of another country. For example, September the 11th, the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Domestic terrorism is also called insurgent terrorism, and it was exemplified by the 1995 truck bombing of a 9-story federal office building in Oklahoma City, which resulted in 168 deaths and the injury of more than 200 people. Class, there's a whole list here. A panel of terrorism experts did come together in a conference in 2003, and they came up with these causes of terrorist attacks. And just to name a few of them, certainly a failed or a weak state, extreme ideologies, either religious or secular, repression by foreign occupation, the presence of a charismatic leader, and of course we can go on with those. Now, looking at America's response to terrorism, we do have defensive strategies and we also have offensive strategies. To give you some examples of defensive strategies, we've got metal detectors and x-ray machines at airports. We strengthen security at potential targets such as embassies and military command posts. And we also have the newly created Department of Homeland Security, which coordinates defensive tactics for the United States government. Some examples of offensive strategies, we have retaliatory raids such as the United States bombing of Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, group infiltration, and preemptive tactics. Some new legislation that facilitates offensive tactics is the USA Patriot Act, and this provides appropriate tools required to intercept and obstruct terrorism. It was signed into law in October of 2001. Since 2002, as many as 779 detainees have been held at Gitmo or Guantanamo Bay. The Bush administration argued that because these detainees were not members of a state's army, they were not covered by the Geneva Conventions, which is the principal international treaty which governs the laws of war and in particular the treatment of prisoners of war and civilians during wartime. I want to mention weapons of mass destruction. They do include chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. Anthrax, for example, although it's usually associated with diseases in animals, it is a highly deadly disease in humans. And of course, there's other examples of the use of weapons of mass destruction as well. I want to say that many American lives have been lost in wars. War certainly does result in many deaths and injuries to non-combatants as well. War results in disabling injuries and illnesses. Before and during World War II, I want to say that the Japanese military forced an estimated 100 to 200,000 women and teenage girls to prostitution as military comfort women. It was half a century ago that the Geneva Convention prohibited rape and forced prostitution in war, but of course both do still continue to occur in modern conflicts. Post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a disorder that it's estimated that 30% of male veterans of the Vietnam War experience PTSD, and of course about 15% do continue to experience. Certainly terrorism, war, and living under the threat of war can disrupt social psychological well-being and family functioning as well. In 2010, worldwide military expenditures approached $1.63 trillion. This exceeds the combined government research expenditures on developing new energy technologies, improving human health, raising agricultural productivity, and controlling population. Money that is spent for military purposes could be allocated to social programs. The estimated expenditures for the entire 2012 fiscal year included more money for national defense and for justice, transportation, veterans benefits, and natural resources and the environment combined. The environmental damage that occurs during war continues to devastate human populations long after the war ceases. Certainly as the casings for landmines erode, poisonous substances, often carcinogenic, leak into the ground. Certainly the ultimate environmental catastrophe that faces the planet is a massive exchange, which is thermonuclear war. Aside from the immediate human casualties, we have poisoned air and crops, which could lead to a nuclear winter. Certainly dust storms and particles would block the sunlight and lower the temperatures. In the event of a large-scale nuclear war, most living things on Earth would die. Certainly the fear of nuclear war contributes to military and arms buildup, which cause environmental destruction, even in times of peace.